All right, welcome to Beyond the Gray podcast. I'm your host, Don Roden, and I'm today with somebody who I had the pleasure of meeting. I think it was probably 6 years ago. I'm not even sure. Donovan Pacholl. I don't want to screw that up. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, as you all know, the Beyond the Gray podcast is we're looking at how do we get beyond our comfort zone into that level of kind of taking a leap beyond this gray area that I like to refer to it as, and get into an uncomfortable area where we make decisions and choices that some may not make, but most of us, when we do, and Donovan is a perfect example of this, we find a lot of reward and pleasure. So Donovan I met him 6, 7 years ago at a conference where he was introducing his company, Embark, which takes people all over the world, where Donovan has participated in many of these really cool adventures, climbed mountains, and I'll let you talk about the mountains, and I'll let you talk about all this. Recently moved his family to Guatemala through COVID, which is something that not many would do, and has done a lot of really impressive things. So first, Embark. How did this idea come about?
Sure. Well, thanks for that. And yes, I can't believe it was 6 years ago that we met. Obviously my name is Donovan. I'm the owner of Embark, an adventure travel company based in Portland, Oregon. But the idea behind Embark was basically that I liked doing adventures around the world, and I like pushing my comfort zone in different ways. It started with when I was a kid. Basically, my dad was taking me on these multi-day rafting trips, and I started organizing those as I was growing up, and I realized that I could organize 100-mile rafting trip for my friends. And so they would say things like, wow, this is amazing. I love doing these adventures. You could do this in your life someday. And this is like when I was in my later teens. And so it evolved into Embark over the course of a few decades. So yes, that's where it is today. It evolved from loving adventures when I was a kid.
So you were in your teens,
Late teens.
late teens, coordinating 100-mile rafting trips.
Starting multi-day rafting trips, and then it did get into some like middle fork of the salmon in northern Idaho and things like that, where I realized like I loved adventures. I was good with logistics and people and putting these together and inspiring people to do these adventures. And then it ended up building my company today, which runs hundreds of adventures around the world for people.
So, I mean, how old were you when you started rafting?
Oh, like, 8 or 9 years old kind of thing with your dad when you'd start on some smaller rivers. In Oregon, there's a lot of rivers that are very accessible. So I was able to start on some classic rivers and then evolve into bigger rivers, and then ended up getting a little bit into guiding and things like that as I got older. But then there's even bigger and better rivers and things like so. So it's kind of started from rivers, but then evolved into more like hiking based adventures and things as I went through this different process in my life where I graduated from college, got kind of a corporate job doing public relations for Microsoft, sitting in a cube, and then realizing that what do you really like in life? And they always say like try to follow your passion, and I don't think it's easy for a lot of people to follow their passion or say whatever you like to do in your hobby should be your job. It's more that I was afforded that ability because I truly could. People wanted to do these adventures, and I learned how to build it into a company.
So let's talk about that passion. Were you always passionate about adventures? Were you always into these trips, or did you find it in the cubicle that you just didn't want to be in the cubicle so bad that your passion kind of brewed up?
Yeah, that's exactly. Like, I mean, sure, it was fun doing adventures and having, your parents take you out on, a summer thing a few times, but it came from after sitting in a cubicle for a couple of years, doing public relations for Microsoft. And it was about the time that movie Office Space came out. There's a classic movie called Office Space where it's this mundane existence in cubicle life. But I realized after doing that I really wanted to do something more. So I decided I was very involved with like travel and or thinking about travel and what you could do. So I decided to push our limits, and I asked my friend if he would do a 6-month backpacking trip across to Europe. Let's go down a little bit into North Africa. Let's go a little bit into the Middle East, but let's spend 6 months with two friends backpacking across with no direction. And so that's what we did. After I sat in that cubicle for a number of years, and about 3 years, realizing, okay, let me research and build an adventure from having built lots of adventures prior to that about a backpacking trip. So I got two of my buddies. I think at the time we saved maybe $4,000 or $5,000, and we, flew into Amsterdam, and from there we went all the way down to like Marrakesh, Morocco. We came back up and cut, over into Germany and the Czech Republic, and then Hungary, and then Croatia, and just kind of pushing ourselves around Europe. And then we moved off into Turkey and spent a month in Turkey. So it kind of evolved from there, and realizing, wow, the world is a great big place. And there's a lot of exciting adventure out there that I don't know in my little bubble in Portland, Oregon.
So cubicle, 6-month trip, backpacking trip through Europe.
Yeah.
And then when you came back, how did that transition back? Because I know every time I've gone somewhere, like the trip that, when like my group through your company climbed Kilimanjaro, you return back, and it's hard to explain it. I think people have asked me before, and I was like, if you had a child and you bring that child home, your world is different. Your perspective is different. So when you came back from 6 months, back to the cubicle?
Yeah, for a little bit, for a very short period. Obviously, I'd left that career, but I came back and got a job for another kind of, marketing style company for about a year. But in relationship to like coming back, obviously the experience, a lot of people come up to you and they say, well, how was it? You know what I mean? You can't qualify 6 months of doing some adventure around the world to anyone. And I think you realize that the experience is really for yourself, and less for other people, even though you want it to be other people and you want it to seem like what you did was incredibly important. And it is to maybe your mom or dad and some friends here or there one time. But after a few weeks, it just gets forgot. Your house is still your home. Your city is still your city. Your friends are still there. But it made me realize that there was more out there. I'd been living in a West Coast bubble of the world, and I wanted to see what was out there. Fortunately, at that time, I met my wife, and she was kind of a little bit like me, and she had gone to school in Germany for a year in high school, self-enrolled in a school in Germany for a year in German. She went to college in South Africa. So all of a sudden, both of our minds together, I've got these big ideas, she said, let's do it. So we found ourselves moving to East Africa within a year after that.
So there's a lot to process here. You're lit. Like let's before we even get into East Africa, because we're not going to let that one slide. But
sure.
The decision-making process. So, we're talking. The podcast is about this gray area.
Right.
It seems as if at a very young age, your gray area, and this is completely my theory, right?
Yeah.
So that we have our comfort, we have our our discomfort, where we can achieve things that we really find great satisfaction with in this gray area. But as we kind of progress through, as we kind of get more and more out of this gray area, it starts to move. So, our comfort level, our space where we're comfortable starts to shift.
Right.
And we need to continually, and at least this is just through the people I've talked with, it seems to be the need to continue to push and do more becomes greater, because, falling back into that routine, that comfort area starts to become easier to do, because you're just taking on more, you're doing more risk, and you're doing. So have you seen that? I mean, we'll go back to East Africa, but is that something that you know, it sounds like your wife is a perfect partner for you, but is that something that you kind of feel as you go through all these decisions?
Yeah, I mean, at the time when this was happening, and granted, this was, 2 decades ago, and so trying to remember what I was thinking at that time, but do you remember that movie that with Kevin Spacey in it? It was called American Beauty. It won an Academy Award, I think.
Right.
So again, this was the concept of this guy going to this advertising job for like 14 years and going through the doldrums of life. And I just realized that I didn't want something like that. I wanted to take my experience with adventure and then see what was out there a little bit more. So I think one of the key points that happened that gave me that little taste is I had spent a lot of time on the West Coast, but in college, I applied for an internship. And I got one of the top 100 internships in America, and it was in Manhattan. So I literally flew, never been to Manhattan in my life. I graduated from university on a Saturday. I flew to New York on a Sunday, and I started working in Manhattan on a Monday. And I'd never been to the East Coast in my life, never explored, just like I said, a West Coast kid with limited travel experience. But that just blew me away, and all the cultures and the people and the city and that was one of those points where I made a decision, and it totally changed my direction in life and what I saw that was out there. I think we have a tendency to stay in our communities and our comfort zones. And you remember a long time ago, they used to say like 150 years ago, people never traveled more than like 20 miles from their house or something like that. Yeah. Well, now we probably have it where it's mainly probably 3 hours from your house, but you'll throw in a trip to Mexico or Canada or something like that. So, some of those core choices that I made at certain points, like just pushed me in a life direction that I wasn't expecting.
East Africa. So I'm sure that move would be one of those decisions that you probably didn't see coming.
Never.
Years before, even probably, I would think even a year before. I mean, probably it's something you don't envision. So how did that happen? That was because your wife was in college there? Or?
Yeah. So how it worked is kind of like this. That 6-month backpacking trip that I was on, remember I told you I went down to Morocco and went all the way to Turkey. Well, I actually decided to throw in a trip to Tanzania, right? So I decided in like 2000 or it was 1999, throw in a trip to Tanzania, just put it in there for a month. I had a friend that went there, and we said, let's go down there. So we went down there for a month, wandered around Kilimanjaro, wandered around as backpackers, like we said. Well, when I came back to the United States, I'd met a gentleman on Kilimanjaro, and I decided to bring him to America. So within just a few months, I decided, hey, I'll write to 50 friends. I'll say, everyone, can you contribute $25? I'm going to bring a Tanzanian back to America, right? At the time, it seemed like a big deal. So I did. I brought him back to America, and he arrived, and my wife's mother contributed to that cause to bring him there. So therefore I meet my wife, right? At that point, I also realized that I wanted to be somewhere else. And she had went to college in South Africa. So we decided I said, hey, I know a house we can rent on Kilimanjaro at, 5,000 feet on Kilimanjaro. And she said, let's go. And, when you first meet a partner trying to impress, like, oh yeah, no big deal, I'll totally go. But then I found myself, I think 9 or 10 months later, leaving that second corporate job and deciding to move to East Africa with my wife, and then realized, like, why are we here? What are we doing? What's our point? And that's how it kind of evolved. So we showed up on the ground on the base of Kilimanjaro in a house that had never seen, and decided to build a life from there. And that's actually where I proposed to her too.
That's a heck of a place to propose. Better than my story. We won't get into that one. So how long did you live in Tanzania?
About a year and a half up on the mountain. But then it, kind of evolved into this other thing where I realized I could put these complex adventures up Kilimanjaro together or as well. So I went from, in my teens and the rafting and the backpacking and things like that to traveling across Europe and the 6-month trip that I pretty much planned, to here I am at this mountain. How do we get 15 people up this mountain with 60 porters, things like that. So it evolved from there.
So the process of climbing Kilimanjaro is not easy. I mean, it's not, like I think somebody with talent, unlike me, could do it relatively, with minimal support. But the way your team does it, I mean, it is an elaborate undertaking. I mean, it is full tent. I mean, it is quite impressive to say the least.
Yep.
How in that year and a half did it start like that, or did you work
We
into
had,
that?
well, again, I'd had experience with, a 100-mile rafting trip and a 50-mile backpacking trip and traveling across Europe. So I had the logistics piece, but we had a group come that wanted to climb Kilimanjaro. So we took them up at our house and went through the process with them, and then started to understand the entire process behind it, which took a long time, quite a few years actually. And so we started to evolve from there and build our adventure travel company from that idea and that first time.
So moving to Tanzania, you talk about, the security, and not even the comfort versus discomfort, security versus, it's a place that I've felt completely safe there. I'd never felt
Right.
one time threatened or anything like that. However, it is completely different than the West Coast of the United States. I mean, it is
Right.
completely different than Manhattan. It is completely
Right.
different than anywhere in the United States for the most part. There may be,
Right.
I don't know, but
Right.
the security versus, lack of security. How did that, was that a concern? Were you afraid?
Yeah. I was definitely a little bit afraid at, landing with this beautiful girl who was, younger than me and not kind of knowing how this is going to evolve. So yeah, I was definitely afraid a little bit. But after living there, we moved there during the rainy season. So and my wife loves languages. So we jumped straight into Swahili, and language was the key to all of it. Just learning even, 20% of it or some of it. It's a relatively easy language, but it connected us with people and allowed us to learn more things. So yes, I was afraid, but being on the ground there, and just like any other adventure, once you're there and you realize the rhythms of life and how to eat and sleep, then the rest of it just kind of comes into play. So yeah, it really just came down to that piece.
What would you say it was, immersing yourself in the culture that kind of
Yeah.
allowed everybody to accept you more?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't move into the part of town where, the expats live or anything like that. We were out, in the village with people that I'm still friends with to this day, that, live in a, mud or small brick house right next to us that were basically our family. So we moved next to a family, that had 5 kids, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12 kind of thing. And the kids obviously are young in their language, so they were able to help teach us. So immersing ourselves in the culture, being that high up on Kilimanjaro, and then just being fun people in general. We brought those big American squirt guns up on Kilimanjaro, the big, huge ones. And at the time, 20 years ago, it was a big deal. So we'd run around and chase the kids, and we'd do all sorts of events up at our house to kind of connect with the local culture. When I was just there with them in visiting that family in March.
You were just back in Tanzania?
Yeah.
In March?
Yeah.
So talking about kids, you now have a family?
Yeah, I have 2 kids. We wanted to give them some really cool, like Swahili name, but they have like blonde hair and blue eyes, and it would not be, Zamaoni or something like that. Just doesn't make sense. So yes, we have 2 kids. We're married. And live in Portland, Oregon, but we just returned from 2 years living in Guatemala.
Yeah. So I was going to fast forward to that. Guatemala. You lived in Guatemala for 2 years. So let's go back to that decision-making process to leave the West Coast again to get to Guatemala. How did that look? Just talk about that for a little bit, if you would.
I mean, to be honest, as a traveler and having, been to say 30 plus countries, I'd never really been interested in Central America. Central America, if you kind of follow it in the press for the last 2 decades, besides with the exception of Costa Rica, it kind of seems like an area where, you don't hear the best things that are coming out. So I was never remotely interested in it. But, having lived in East Africa for a while, having traveled a lot, my wife and I decided there was value in putting our kids into a different culture, into a different experience. And we had talked about it for a long time. So we decided we had to find a place to live that didn't fall in the comfort zone, right? The comfort zone is a Costa Rica. The comfort zone is, a handful of beach towns in Mexico.
Near a resort or
Something. Like, we had to find something that was outside of our comfort zone. So having, owned a trekking company and knowing that Guatemala actually has a lot of mountains, right? I think there's 23 mountains in Guatemala, big mountains in Guatemala, that maybe I can go there, figure out some adventures in Guatemala, but also immerse my kids into like a different culture. So we went down there and checked it out for a month. And then came back and decided, okay, this is a place where we can go put our kids in a school and see what happens. There are, a handful of other people down there as well doing a few things like that, but it's not on the level as other, kind of industrialized. We didn't want to be in an industrialized city like a Panama or anything like that. We wanted to be in something where it's just local people doing local things. So we decided to move to Guatemala.
And how old are your children?
14 and 10. So we moved there when they were, 8 and 12, or I think it was 7 and 11 at the time. Yeah.
What did they think about it? Did they think?
Well, we've dragged our kids around the world a lot. When you tell someone, hey, you're going to go to another school in a language that you've never even, my kids couldn't even say, ¿Cómo estás? Like, they didn't know, how are you? Right. It's intimidating for kids. It's intimidating for them. But I can tell you, as of today, imagine, or I don't know if you, we always had like a kid in school that came from, Mexico, in our small town, and didn't speak a bunch of English. And then a few years later, he speaks English. Well, I can tell you now, my kids speak Spanish.
They moved down there. You moved down there without language.
Yeah, without language, which is huge, which is totally huge. But there's this theory out there that if kids learn a language before puberty, that the ability for them to not only have the accent, but to process it the younger, it's better. But it has to be full immersive. It has to be like just in there all day, involved in it. And so then we put some lessons while we were there, but fortunately the school was willing to kind of work with us. But I can tell you, just a few weeks ago, I'm walking around, we just moved back to the United States, but walking around my neighborhood, and I see my son with like 7 other kids, and he's all telling them in Spanish, like, you go here, we're playing hide and seek, you go here, I'm going to run over there. Fully immersed in 100% Spanish, no English mix into it. It's really, really impressive. But it also took a 2-year commitment to do that, which is a lot for some people.
I tell you, that is, I think that's, I don't know. I don't want to rank, the cool things that you've done, but I know I have 3 kids myself, and to think about doing something like that, taking that leap, I'm comfortable with taking risk that would affect, me, but I think that is just absolutely phenomenal. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not without pain. It's not without pain, though. And that's the whole thing with this, is you have to accept the pain of the experience and those things. And when your kid comes home at the beginning crying or saying, I have no idea what they said, that was hard, but it evolves, and they have to be able to accept that pain to know that there's going to be something better. And to me, I mean, like, for example, my older son, he took algebra 100% in Spanish and got straight A's. I mean, that's impressive. It's totally impressive. So, and then here we are at the parent teacher conferences at the end, and I don't even understand, half of what they're saying, but my son's like, well, he said I did this and he said I did that. So, the thing about this is, I think in today's world, we've hit this globalization peak. I think the adaptability is really, really going to be key for kids in the future. And so I wanted my kids to realize, like, now that you speak Spanish, now you have a whole slew of countries around the world that you could go live and function in as a person, whereas a lot of people, might not have that luxury without the language piece.
Is it a move, or are these decisions, are these actions more for growth as a family, as a person, as people, or is it just that the movement of the comfort zone where you're trying to continually, where do you
Yeah.
see the source of this coming from?
Yeah. I mean, it's trying
Desire?
to, it is trying to continue to push it. Like where I'm already I'm going to give my kids like 2 years to be back in the States. And then that one transition year, it's going to be, into the next place and the next place that I want to be. So yeah, I mean, there's that famous quote, your comfort zone is a wonderful place, but nothing grows there. I can't tell you why I like to be put in uncomfortable situations, but it's true. Nothing grows there. And I always ask myself this. I say, after a big adventure that we've done or some experience, do I regret it? And I've never regretted any of those decisions, even though at the time, leaving a great, comfortable job, going on some adventure in some country that I don't know anything about, I never ever regret the experience. I lose some things in it. I lose, maybe some friendships. I lose some community aspects of living in our community, but I gain it somewhere else. I gain an experience. So, but the other thing about this too is if you think about it, like from a historical perspective, I think in the past, like humans used to live in uncomfortable. I mean, if we just jump back 100 years,
Right.
I think to my grandparents and things like that, like, the life was more of a struggle back then. And, I think hear stories of my grandpa, like I ran away when I was 14 and I rode a train and I smuggled liquor for the mob in Chicago and all these stories. I'm like, whoa. And then I look back to where I was telling you, after my college time was like comfortable cube, comfortable house, everything's fine. And I want just a life stories. I want life stories.
Do you when you get so over the next 2 years, the idea of like sitting still,
Right.
how do you feel? Can you sit still? Can you stay
Yeah,
in
you
this
know what? I can
comfortable?
though. I can because it's too easy. Its comfort is really easy. Like just even getting back here, like we've lived for 2 years with no possessions, like pretty much no possessions, just few bags of clothes and then houses and places that we've rented, and getting back into the comfort of American life and things like that, consumerism. It feels great. I like it. You know what I mean? And I can't wait till the fall to watch college football games and sit around. Like I'm excited about that. But I realize that to give my kids and myself that life story at the end, um, that I have to kind of push myself. And I think it gets harder as the older you get to. It definitely
Mhm.
gets harder. But like for example, I have a family member who's 42 years old who was just diagnosed with stage 4 like colon cancer, and he's been given a short time frame to live, and I don't want that to happen. I want those life stories and to look back at it all and had some pretty crazy adventures.
Well, the book you're writing is pretty outstanding. What have I missed? Is there anything along the way, or anything you'd like to share with people who are kind of stuck in that gray area where they understand that they need to take some sort of a risk, or they want to do something more than what they're doing, but it's hard to take that first step. Do you have any advice for people who are in that situation?
Well, so this is what I do. I mean, I organize what I call once in a lifetime adventures,
Yes.
and it's not always a once in a lifetime. It's actually an adventure that people end up coming every few years because they want that experience. So, as I mentioned, as Embark does adventures. So from Kilimanjaro, we started, trekking to our space camp and Machu Picchu, and then all sorts of bizarre and different types of esoteric adventures around the world. So that's what we do. But I can tell you that people go on these experiences, whether it's a 100-mile walk around Mount Rainier in Washington. It sounds a big adventure, right? But they always come back and they kind of rank their life experiences, and it's always those experiences that were the most difficult end up where there was the most quote suffering unquote,
Hmm.
that rank in those experiences of life. So just like on Kilimanjaro, I'm sure you had people on Kilimanjaro, or even you, the summit night of Kilimanjaro, hiking up that is an amazing hard experience. You're going to walk for 8 hours up in the middle of the night after you've just walked for 6 days, go to half the oxygen that you have at sea level, and then you're going to walk for another 8 hours down. I mean, that's a really hard adventure, and it could be way below zero. When I was on Kilimanjaro in March, it was, it was definitely, way below freezing. It was cold. It was hard. It was one of the hardest things. Do I regret it now? No. When I was doing it, was it awful? You bet. It was totally awful. So I think, I mean, pushing your physical limits, pushing your body. People always want to like run marathons and things like that. And I think, that's great. But you can also walk and hike, and you can hike. The human body can walk incredibly long distances. So just those kind of experiences, just getting out of your comfort zone, maybe it's only for a week or two, make people have that life story. So they go back to their family and said, I climbed the highest mountain in Africa, and it's an amazing experience.
Yeah, and I'll add to that on the group that I went with, we weren't all. I think people have the misconception that you got to be healthy, fit, super fit in your 20s, and no, there was. We had a lady who was in her 70s. There was a couple who were in their 60s. Out of the 11 of us, I think 8 of us made it all the way to the top, and 10 of us made it right up to the top. They just couldn't quite finish it. But I'll second that. I mean, it was the first 5 days walking was absolutely awesome. The summit night was a completely different story.
Right.
Got to the top and was thrilled to get down. But the whole experience, and I think people need to kind of understand, just in particular, just this one trip, this Kilimanjaro experience. I mean, it's an experience to get there. And we all said when we left, and it's an experience while you're there. The summit was the least important part of our entire experience.
Right.
Like we all said that we're getting to the summit. Like that's the goal. That's the pinnacle of our experience in this trip. And then as we're leaving, it was the people who we met. It was the porters. It was the day that we took in Tanzania to kind of, eat out and meet locals. That was the experience. So Embark isn't just doing that though. I mean, so we had talked about planning that group to go to Machu Picchu, and then COVID happened. And then for a lot of work for us, another whole. So Machu Picchu is next on our list, but Embark does. I mean, the website alone just shows a catalog of complete just options that don't involve 19,000 feet. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
talk about some of the other options that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I go out and find adventures around the world and do adventures around the world to show people that you can. So yes, we do classic trips like Everest Base Camp, Machu Picchu, Kilimanjaro, but then we go out. So we're just like, and every year we're adding a few. So like I told you, I was in Guatemala. Well, we decided the highest mountain in Central America is in Guatemala. It's called Mount Tacomuco. And so we decided to climb it. And not only that, we decided to walk like 50 miles through the Guatemalan highlands. Guatemalan highlands is an area that's kind of indigenous Mayans, right? So the Mayans is big ethnic group that still live today in southern Mexico and Guatemala. And there's those people some of them don't even speak Spanish, right? So you're in a Spanish speaking country in Guatemala, and there's people up in the Guatemalan highlands. So my point is we're putting together these abstract adventures all through different countries, like a place like Guatemala things, right? But then we evolve into more comfortable countries like that. We're going to Greenland next year, and we're doing a series of treks in Greenland. I'm going to northern Sweden to do a trek in the oldest national park in Europe. So all sorts of places and exploring adventures. And that's, again, it's my passion. It's what I do. I love to do that. And I love to find those for people. People have a tendency to want to do kind of these core name places that people have been, but then there's also this next level of people that want to do these kind of more abstract adventures. And so we kind of take people through this process where they start in Kilimanjaro, they go to Machu Picchu, they go to Nepal, but then they start to get into Bhutan or Guatemala or different things like that where there's adventures. So yeah, so that's kind of what I live and breathe every day.
How do people find out about Embark, and kind of what's the process for them to take that next step?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually word of mouth, to be honest. It's a lot of word of mouth. And we obviously work with a lot of big foundations that do it, but then they come back year after year just by following us on our newsletter or our Facebook page.
And what is the website?
It's embarkexplorationco.com.
And you're on, I've seen you on Instagram, Facebook. People can sign up for the newsletter right through the website, correct?
Yeah. So they see the adventures that we're doing, and we invite. And these aren't adventures where it's a bunch of 20-something, elite athletes. These are 40, 50, 60 somethings on adventures in different parts of the world, and just having that
40-year-old right here did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying all this as a plug necessarily. I you brought a great point. It's just take that step. It's find an adventure, find whatever degree of that adventure is, whatever, if it comes down to a cost issue, a time issue, whatever it is, find the adventure, take the step, get that experience. I mean, you've been doing it your entire life. Whenever I've done something like that and it's not been anywhere near what you've done, it always comes back. It's a reset for me. And I think, it just, you learn about other people, you see what else is out there. And it kind of, for me, at least, it's always centered me and kind of put things back into perspective. So,
well, it's something that's happening right now that is kind of, you're talking about like price and things like that. And a lot of people can't afford these kind of things, but there's this movement called micro adventures where you're trying to do different adventures around your community that you wouldn't do. And there's this book that actually came out a few years back where they profile all these different adventures. So last year we decided to, or not last year, prior to going to Guatemala, we decided, let's walk the length of our city from north to south, right? So we went to got a bunch of people at the southernmost point of Portland, Oregon, which is a big metropolitan city.
mm-hmm.
We walked from the southernmost point to the northernmost point. It was like 31 miles, but we did it in a day. So, and it was amazing. I saw these parts of Portland and things that I would never expect. So there's this movement to test all these things where you're supposed to ride your bicycle around the perimeter of your city, or you're trying to sleep on different people's land by just showing up with a tent and saying, hey, I'm spending the night here and I'm on my bike. So there's all sorts of micro adventures that people can do as well.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Donovan, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to share before?
No, just remember though, that even in terms of like adventures and things today, Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos,
that's right,
company like shot a rocket with him inside it into suborbital space. That must be an amazing adventure that took a lot of time, and I bet he won't regret that at all.
Yeah, right. The first one, well, I think he was the first to get Virgin Galactic just did it recently, but I think he went a little bit higher or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I can't even fathom that. That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Donovan.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, and I can't wait to hear. I'm going to circle back probably every year with you, I guess, because your adventures just continue. It's pretty awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks. We're going to climb Aconcagua in South America in February. Highest mountain.
Nice.
Yeah.
Super awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.